of that. We began looking last week at City Church in Matthew chapter 2 at two different types of people in Matthew chapter 2. There's a villain in Matthew chapter 2. His name is Herod. You can go back and listen to last week's message to catch up on Herod. And then there's a group in Matthew chapter 2, a group of seekers that we often call the Magi or the wise men. Do we have any Christmas music fans in the house? Love Christmas music. Okay, we're kind of on Christmas music. We play it some and then cut it off, it seems like, pretty early. How many of you turn on your Christmas music way too early according to other people's standards? Like any pre-Thanksgiving people? A few pre-Thanksgiving people. Anybody that plays it longer than Christmas Day, you're still playing it like first of the year? Okay, there's some of you out there. We do have a counseling room through these doors for all the pre-Thanksgiving, post-Christmas music players. That's always the big debate, right? How early is too early? I always get cracked up about the Christmas songs about the birth of Jesus because they do not always portray reality, right? Like, I love the performance our kids did. I love the song, The Little Drummer Boy, and the rhythm it has and all the things about it. But it always cracks me up in that song that it's so far removed from reality because right when baby Jesus goes to sleep, then suddenly Mary, the mother, agrees to a drum solo. Like, this is not accuracy, right? All you moms out there can understand this. You've had your tiptoe into the room, out of the room moments. Baby's finally down, right? You've been struggling, trying to get the baby to go to sleep. Finally, after it seems like an eternity, you're able to get the child to sleep. And as you're tiptoeing out of the room, you're just praying to God that you do not hear another sound, right? Another cry, another squeak. Now, can you imagine a little boy shows up at that moment? It's like, I got a drum solo for you. You probably would not be ready for that moment. And I would be even more pressed if you had an ox and a lamb that were able to keep time while that was going on. And so these songs do not always portray the reality of life. Christmas carols, Christmas songs, they often tend to portray that first Christmas night as elegant and squeaky and clean and sweet and cute. It's kind of the opposite of what happens at the birth of a child, right? I've been in the room for the birth of a child. It's anything but cute and elegant and squeaky clean. It's the opposite of that. And we shouldn't expect the first Christmas night to have been any different. Unlike the popular song, I can tell you it probably was not a silent night. There was probably a lot of crying, a lot of screaming, a lot of pain, especially when those weird shepherd dudes showed up from the field on the night of the birth. The Bible says, praising God at the top of their lungs. So it really wasn't a silent night. As a matter of fact, the invasion of God on earth was not a silent night at all. And we can't be silent about it now. You see, God entered the world and left it forever changed. And no matter how you celebrate it or do not celebrate it, the Christmas story, in and of the story of itself, it demands a Jesus response. Like, what will I do with the story of Jesus that Christmas is built around? I mean, I can ignore it, right? I can pretend it doesn't exist. I can do the Santa exchange and make it all about Santa and his reindeer and his elves. Maybe I can tip the hat to Jesus during Christmas by making a reference to Jesus or reminding my kids about the birth of Christ. Maybe I show up at a Christmas Eve service. And so there's a lot of things you can do with the story of Jesus. But if you embrace the primary idea of the Christmas story, of the Jesus story, which doesn't end in a manger and a barn, but ends at a cross and a tomb, then things simply can't be the same. They won't be the same, because you're forced to respond one way or another, just like the group of seekers that we find in Matthew chapter 2, the ones that we call the Magi or the wise men. Here's their story, first 3 verses, Matthew 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it arose and have come to worship him. And when the Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. We don't know a lot about these royal travelers. What we do know from the text is that they were from the east. They have some Old Testament knowledge about the Messiah. They saw a star. They traveled a long distance to find the Messiah, and they brought some gifts. And then if you know the gifts, you're kind of like, what kind of weird gifts are these? Frankincense and myrrh. Like, I don't know, are they like essential oil salesmen or something like that? Sounds like what it is, right? I'm sure my wife would have been in line to receive the frankincense and myrrh because that sounds like an essential oil to me. The other thing we do know about the wise men from the old King James Version is that they were actually firefighters on the side. Did you know this? The text says that they came from afar. Things that we do not know, no matter what the song says, we don't know how many there were. You know, we don't know that there were we three kings of Orient are. We know they brought three gifts, but we do not know there's more than likely way more than just three of the Magi. We don't know their exact roles. They seem to be half philosopher, half royalty. We don't know their hometown. There's a lot of speculation what they mean by the East. Some say maybe they came from Babylon, that when Daniel was in Babylon, that he talked about God and they developed a group of God followers there. We don't know a lot about it. We don't know how long the journey took. More than likely, it took a couple of years. And so by the time they get to Jesus, the indications from the text are he's probably a toddler by this time. We do know that they are seekers of Jesus. They paid attention and they acted on what God revealed to them. Just like the shepherds in the field received news from the angels and went to the manger to see Jesus, so the wise men responded to the star that God revealed to them. They acted on what God said. But let me tell you something extremely important here. Paying attention, which is what they were doing, paying attention to the star, paying attention to the angels, the shepherds, paying attention is not the same as knowing. And seeing a star is not the same as believing in Jesus. Seeing a star is not the same as believing in Jesus. Did you know the same is true today? I talked about last week a phrase, throne tension, that we're kind of always dealing with who occupies the throne of my heart. Here's another phrase that I often talk about at Christmas that is equally as dangerous for us. I call it manger danger. Manger danger. And here's what manger danger is. It's not that we don't know the story of Jesus. I might argue that we even know it too well at times because we know a lot of details, don't we? We know about the manger scenes. We know when we get out our manger scene, there's the Jesus and there's the star and the angel. And usually we bring the wise men into the manger scene. We know a lot of facts. We know a lot of Jesus songs. We know a lot of Christmas songs. If you're a regular in church, you know a lot of Jesus stuff. If you grew up in church, maybe you've been out for a while, or your adult life, maybe you're kind of done with church after you left childhood. But either way, you probably know, living in the Bible Belt, you probably know a lot of Jesus stuff. But have we failed to pay attention to the true meaning of Christmas? We know a lot about Jesus, but do we really know Jesus? So last weekend, I took my three older kids. We drove to Atlanta and watched a college basketball game. Now, I know I'm in college football territory, and some of you are like, I didn't even know college basketball existed. But we are college basketball fans in my house, and in particular, we pull for the North Carolina Tar Heels, okay? And the Tar Heels were playing in Atlanta against Kentucky, so big rivalry. And so we go, and while we're driving over there, we've been to a number of Carolina games in our life, and my oldest daughter, Kaylee, has always wanted to meet this legendary coach that Carolina had for many years named Roy Williams, okay? So he is, I'll put it in language you can understand. For a Tar Heels fan, Roy Williams is kind of the equivalent of a Nick Saban for Alabama football fans. Some of you are like, there's no way. Yeah, it is. I hate to tell you, but you can actually feel as strongly about other coaches as you feel about Saban. And so we kind of feel that way about Roy Williams. And long story short, we saw Roy Williams walking around in just the foyer area of the stadium. And so my girls are texting me like, Roy Williams is here, get here as soon as possible. And so we ran up and we were able to get a picture with him and all that. And we know some things about Roy Williams. I can tell you his style as a coach, how long he was at Carolina, the national championships he's won. I can tell you a little bit about his history. I know a little bit about Roy Williams, but guess what did not happen? When I went up and asked Coach Williams for a picture, he did not say, Devin Hudson, how are you doing? It's been a long time since I've seen you. Tell me about the kids. Oh, man, it's so great to see Kaylee, Reagan, and Zach here. None of that happened. You know why? Because he doesn't know me. And truth is, I don't really know him. I know a lot about him, but I don't know him. I didn't say, how's the wife? How's the kids? How's the grandkids? Tell me what's going on with your golf game. None of that, because I don't really know him. You can know a lot about someone, particularly someone that's kind of in the spotlight. And Jesus is in the spotlight. You can know a lot about someone and not know them. You see, there's a difference in the Magi and the scribes. Look at 4 through 6 in this story. When Herod heard this, he assembles all the chief priests and scribes of the people, and he inquired of them where the Christ is to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will be shepherd of my people Israel. You see, the scribes were these kind of Messiah experts. They knew the prophecies. They knew the exact location where the Messiah was to be born. And they say all these things, and then it's so fascinating to me in the text that they say he's going to be born in Bethlehem. The prophet talked about it, and then there's just nothing. They never take another step, do they? They just relay this information, and then the Magi head off to find Jesus. They know about God's promised Messiah, but they don't want to know him. They fail to seek, they fail to act, they fail to believe, they fail to tag along with the Magi. And that's the major danger, that you can know all about Jesus and not know Jesus. You can go to church, you can live the life, you can be a moral person, you can know the songs, you can use the language, and you cannot know him. It's almost the equivalent if I was kind of doing something to work on my marriage, and let's say that Ashley and I were having a hard time communicating. We're not. Don't get worried. We're not having a hard time communicating. But let's say we were, hypothetical. And if that was the case, I can probably tell you it would be somehow my fault that the failure of communication was happening. Ashley has no problem communicating. I'm a dude, so, communication is not natural. I didn't mean that like whatever happens is my fault. You know what I'm saying? But let's just say that I was determined to work on communication. So I got a book about communicating in marriage. And I dove into that book, and I began to read that book, and I was focused on the book and doing everything I can to get the information out of the book. And Ashley came up to me and was like, hey, Devin, can we talk? And I was like, hey, leave me alone. I'm reading this book. Man, there's some good stuff in here about marriage communication. Honey, can we talk? I got some things to talk about. Would you leave me alone? I'm reading the book about good communication in my marriage. I just want to spend some time with you and talk through some of our... Would you please let me read my book about communicating in marriage? You see, it doesn't do me a lot of good to be reading the book about communicating in marriage if I'm not actually communicating in my marriage. You can know a lot about Jesus and not know Jesus. You see, the greatest challenge of Christmas is not the meal planning and whether there's enough batteries and whether you got the right sizes and whether you spend an equal amount of time with both sides of the family. You ever had that struggle? Not who's spending with what time. It's not paying for all the stuff and getting the cookies out on time or watching the Christmas story on repeat again. The challenge of Christmas is, do you know the Christ? Not just about Christ, but do you know Christ? Now, I want to pause here and say, I'm not just talking to people who do not know Christ or claim to be followers of Jesus. I'm talking about all of us who even profess to be Jesus followers. Are we seeking him? Are we falling more deeply in love with Jesus? Now, you know what that implies? That implies that Jesus is worth seeking, that he is worth pursuing. And that's what happens in the story. Verse 7, Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go, search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. After listening to the king, they went on their way. Behold, the star that had been seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. The Magi believed that Jesus was worth pursuing. The Magi want to find this Messiah. I mean, maybe the most impressive thing about this story is a group of men stop to ask for directions, right? Like, where is the Magi? And then they go to such great lengths to find him because they believe he was worth leaving everything to pursue. Look at this little short parable that Jesus gives in Matthew 13. Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. That story implies that Jesus is a treasure that is worth giving up everything to pursue. Let me speak very just frank with us. Everything that you have, you will one day lose. All your gifts that you're going to receive, your family, your job, your retirement, your home. The brutal reality of living in a very temporary and broken world is that one year, you will pack up Christmas and you will not unpack it the next year. And your stuff will become someone else's stuff. Your junk will become someone else's junk. Anybody want to buy a VCR player? Are you tracking? Your stuff will become someone else's stuff. Now, a few people will remember and they'll talk about you for a short season, but eventually you will fade into the obscurity of history. The reality is your great-great-grandchildren will more than likely not even know your name. You will fade into the obscurity of history. Unless you have a great-great-grandparent like me whose name was Phlegm. Like, how do you forget Phlegm? But unless your name is Phlegm, you're going to fade into the obscurity of history. Merry Christmas. Aren't you glad you came to the Christmas Eve service? You see, here's why Jesus is worth pursuing. When you get Jesus, you get everything. You get the gift that you will never lose. You get the gift that keeps on giving. And no, I'm not talking about the Jelly of the Month Club. You get the gift that keeps on giving. You see, trees fall apart, lights burn out, songs get turned off, gifts get old and worn out. But in 1,000,000 years, we will still be praising his name because he is our treasure. And finding and knowing Jesus is the only pursuit worth giving up everything. You see, whatever you are pursuing, wherever you are pursuing fulfillment outside of Jesus will leave you dissatisfied. Your job, your relationships, your money, that substance that you rely upon, the approval of other people, all these temporary things, pursuing meaning and fulfillment and purpose in temporary stuff, we know this. It leaves us frustrated and angry and isolated and depressed because temporary things were not created to bring us fulfillment and meaning and purpose. Only Jesus brings eternal life. Only Jesus offers the ultimate fulfillment, the ultimate joy, the ultimate life. And the wise men sensed this truth, that he's worth the pursuit, that he is worth giving up everything, if necessary, to pursue. And then I'm always entertained a little bit by verse 11. Going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. And opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Like, what did the wise men think when they found Jesus? I mean, he's a toddler. He's a toddler in probably a small hut in a tiny village. What did they think when they unpacked their greatest treasures for a 2-year-old? Like, I've been around a 2-year-old. Have you been around a 2-year-old? Like, they unpacked their greatest treasures for a toddler. Like, what a beautiful image we have in this text. That they find Jesus, that he's worth the pursuit, and then they fall before him. They worship him. They give their very best. Their response to their Jesus encounter was one of humility and worship and giving. And maybe in that moment, they questioned, should we give our very best? Should we give our treasures to a toddler? Like, we face the same question every single day. Will I give Jesus my everything? If I'm being really honest with you, I tend to hold on to a certain percentage of me and a certain percentage of my stuff. I don't know what it is for you. Like, what percentage do we tend to hold on to? Is it 10 or 20 or 50? What is it that we tend to cling to as God exposes our hearts before Him? What do we tend to hold on to as we pursue and worship Jesus? And the Christmas story reminds us that Jesus invites us to lay aside everything and trust that He is worth the pursuit. Here's what that means for us in everyday life. Like, what is it that keeps you up at night? Or if you're like me, what is it that wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning? What do we worry about? Is it the next season of life? Is it my financial security? Where the next check is coming from? Is it, am I going to live life alone? Is it my job? Is it some sickness or disease that has infiltrated my family circle? Is it my kids? Is it my relationship with those who are close to me? What is it that worries us and keeps us up at night? You see, Jesus is worth our trust. He is worth our everything, including that small percentage or big percentage that we tend to cling onto. And so I invite you to follow Jesus, to pursue Him, to worship Him, to give everything to Him, because He is worth it. He is worth our attention. He's worth our pursuit. He's worth our trust. He's worth our everything. Many of you know, if you're a part of City Church, the story of Yashweh and Julie, who God has brought to City Church from the kind of gang-ridden territory island of Haiti. And we were kind of first introduced to the Yashweh and Julie story before we knew them back in October 2021. The Beaches knew them and had kind of talked to us about them, but we didn't really know them personally. But in October 2021, there were 17 missionaries, 12 adults, 5 kids, that were abducted by a group of gangs in Haiti. It's the same group of gangs that were threatening the lives of Yashweh and Julie. Same group. And you may have heard this story because it made national news back then. But these 17 missionaries were abducted by this group of gangs in Haiti. And the captors, like they do now, demanded millions of dollars for their release. After 2 months, 5 of them were released, and the other 12 managed to escape. During this 2-month ordeal, these missionaries did not know if they would live or if they would die. Every day they would gather to pray and to read Scripture and to sing praise to their King loud enough for their captors to hear. They also encouraged the other captives. Finally, on December the 15th, just before Christmas, they saw an opportunity. They fled into the night, and by daybreak, they found someone with a phone, made a call, and long story short, they were rescued. And I still remember seeing the press conference of that group of missionaries when they were safe. And it was during that press conference that this group of missionaries gathered together and they began to sing the old hymn, "Nearer my God to thee, nearer my God to thee." And I thought, how does that happen? How is this group whose lives were in danger and threatened, and yet in the midst of this turmoil and brokenness, their heart still saying, "Nearer my God to thee." Here's why. Because for them to live or die, Jesus is the treasure worth pursuing. Live or die, He was the treasure worth pursuing. I want to invite you to pursue Jesus, to seek Him, and He will meet you right where you are. And I can promise you, if you were to gather the people of this room together and tell our stories, that you would know that in our lives, we've discovered that Jesus is the treasure worth pursuing. Good, bad, up, down, difficult, easier times, through it all, that He is the treasure worth pursuing. Let's bow our heads for prayer.